You are listening to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast. I'm Michael from Arizona. With me always is my good friend
Jay from the hills of Texas.
And AK Mike in Texas.
Oh, well, sorry about that, folks. We were having a big
Shenanigans.
discussion. And, Jay hit the button and the thing started before we were quite ready. But anyway, we'd like to welcome you to this week's podcast. And I guess we got some good news. Jay, you actually got to go fly this week.
Yeah, actually had a great time this weekend. Got with my good buddy Jim, and the stars had finally aligned. Both him and I have been busy and just missing each other, and finally we got together and we got to go out and do a little flying. So it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and
so we got
for those of you that don't know, Jim has given us information before we've talked about him in the past podcasts, but I've actually flown with him, and great stick. He's got some really cool looking airplanes, and we love it when he comes out and is able to fly. And when I'm visiting down there in Austin, I always love it when we get out there, and he's got quite the setup and a little easy up, and he brings donuts, and he kind of treats us right. So we appreciate him.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
Are you listening, Doug Leroy?
Exactly, right?
Yeah. But no, this week we got out, and like you said, we haven't been flying together since, I want to say it was before, it must have been about like January or December of this year, I think was the last time we actually
I think it
flew
was
together.
before you came to the Electric Festival.
Yes, it was definitely before
Okay.
that. Wait,
So
don't
I
think
just
you've flown
happen to
since.
have a statistic about the wind in Texas
Yeah.
this year. May has been the windiest month for Texas since '86 or something
Really?
like that. Yep.
Wow. Well, I know I had to call.
Above 15 miles an hour or something like that.
I had to call on my parents because they had the wind got so big that it tornadoes formed and went through just north of where they were. I was afraid their new house got lifted off the thing, but they said no, it passed off, way north of us. I was like, okay. So the wind has been strong, and I know that I was down in Austin just recently, just for work, and there was a couple of times where I had to literally go as far south as San Antonio to get into Austin. So
Really? Wow.
that it made for quite a show. All my folks on board were looking out the window going, And we touched down in Austin, and we were on the ground for literally 5 minutes, and they closed the airport because the weather.
Wow.
Yeah, the weather.
that bad? Wow.
Oh, it was awful.
So what do they do with the airplanes? They turn it into the wind and then just say, good luck?
Well, the airplanes are pretty heavy. I mean, if they needed to do it, they'll pull it off the gate and turn it into the wind. But yeah, if you're being facetious, I appreciate it. But I have had that in my career. I've had an airplane that did not get put into the wind, and as a result, it sat on its tail.
Oh,
It was
wow!
a
So
big
I was
deal.
just like making a joke about pointing in the wind.
No,
So that's what they really do. Oh, wow!
Yeah, well, I mean,
guess-
if the wind is
Makes sense.
they got to put it out there. Normally, they're heavy enough; they're not going to get moved around. But
Sure.
the wind would have to get up to over 130 miles per hour, 140 miles per hour for the airplane to actually start doing something. And in this particular case, they said that the winds were up into the 140s.
Wow.
And it was between two hangars, and so it created a Venturi effect, and so it actually got it up even higher, and it kind of focused all that right on the airplane.
Right,
and the airplane
right.
literally just lifted the nose off the ground and then turned 90 degrees to the wind. The wind moved it.
Wow.
So they called us up, and they're like, "Hey, Captain, your airplane's sitting on its tail." And I'm like, "Yeah." No, there. I told him, I was like, "Yeah, that's good," because it usually has a tail stand sometimes, to keep the weight back if it's long enough. And sure enough, we went out there, and the nose was way in the air. We had to get a cherry picker to actually get up in the cockpit and transfer fuel to the front of the airplane, because we had
So they could
central
make it.
fuel
So they
tanks.
could tip it over.
Yeah, it actually came down real slow. It was kind of neat, but it was kind of interesting.
Huh.
It was a fun time.
It didn't hurt the plane.
I can't say that. It did hurt the airplane, but
Okay.
It didn't get out of there unscathed.
But I said, Psst, I'll fly it anyway. It's fine.
No, I never
fine.
said that. Unfortunately, just real quick, it's kind of off topic, but they have what they call a K loader, which is how they load all the stuff, and it was sitting in front of the wing, and when the wind pitched it around, it turned, the wing actually hit the K loader, and the K loader is a big piece of equipment, and it's not moving anywhere because it's real heavy, and it's for moving thousands of pounds of freight up and down. And so anyway, it took out the leading edge. There was a hole big enough that we could start an arm in there, and so we wound up having to spend. It was over the holidays, and we wound up having to spend Christmas there. So my Christmas party that my wife had planned, it didn't get canceled, so everybody showed up, and I was supposed to be the host, and I was in a whole different country. And she had to hold it for herself. So, yeah, it's been 20-something years, and she still doesn't let me forget that. So,
yeah, because you had everything to do with that.
Yeah,
you had everything to do with that.
Well, she tried to get me home.
I assume if this is wind that affects airplanes. So, Jay, did any wind affect your guys' airplanes?
Yeah. Unfortunately, our little field
they don't weigh as much as mine, so.
So was there a plane pointed up in the air? I mean,
no planes pointed up in the air, but our flag was flipping back and forth like somebody was flipping a coin. You take off one direction, and by the time you got heading towards the downwind, now all of a sudden you're going, oh, wait a minute, it's totally switched direction. We got to turn the plane around, go back to the other direction where I took off.
This is that whole story about barefoot flying upwind both directions kind of story.
Right. That's exactly what it is.
His windsock looked like a fan was going around.
It was going around. Whipping it. It looked like somebody had a motor on it. So that's pretty much what it was like.
Kid, I flew into the wind both ways.
Both ways. That's right.
Both ways up.
And it was
upwind,
difficult, but unfortunately, Jim had actually brought out the plane that we were talking about an episode or two ago, just talking about motors for
the Rascal
motors for
So
he had his
we
Rascal
put the
out
electric
there.
motor in,
the Rascal.
So he brought that plane out to fly that day, and so we were going to maiden it with this new electric setup. Well, before that, we flew a little bit. We start off flying like the Zaggy or the Tough Wing or something, just to get our fingers, warmed up, and then we swapped to some other planes before getting to the real nice ones, right? So, unfortunately, by the time we kind of went through all the other planes, unfortunately, Jim had a small mishap with with his wing. By the time he got it back, so that was one that needed some repairs. And then, I flew my Tough Wing, didn't have too much of a problem flying it. And then, I think, what was the next one that he had? He has, another Cub, the Kingfisher from Hobby King. That one flew okay. We were able to do all right with that, but he was starting to have some problems, kind of bouncing it down the field a little bit. And I did too, a little bit. Nothing really major with that. It was just that the flaps on that one, we haven't figured that one out, just the settings for the flaps. So if you put the flaps in just a little bit too much, they're a little bit too effective. So, it could be a bad thing. So I was like, don't put the flaps on until we can kind of get that sorted out on the day.
They're too effective. I thought you wanted the flaps to be more effective.
Not where it totally stops.
Does it pitch the nose up and just kind of stall it out?
Well, either it was doing things like pitching the nose up just when you're in level flight and the nose would just pitch up. That was kind of bad. Or it was pitching the nose way down. The plane would slow down, and it would kind of stop the plane as you were making a turn, and that was always bad because then you start stalling and doing bad things. Right. So I was like, okay, we'll work with that, later when it's, kind of calm and we can take it up high and see what it's doing. So anyway, as we kind of worked through that plane, what else he had that plane. Oh, and then he had his little Panther, the little jet one.
Oh yeah.
And that one normally does okay, but since it was blustery like it was out there, that little jet does not like being blown. It gets blown around quite a bit.
Too light.
Yeah, it's a little too light. And the second thing was, when I flew it the first time, I flew it and I'm like flying. I'm like, man, this plane is really sensitive. What is up with this plane? I didn't realize that, it has a gyro in it. Well, we had the gyro so it was perfectly set and everything, but I totally forgot to turn it on. So that's why I was a little pitchy and a little crazy. And so I landed the plane and we checked it all out, and I go, oh, that's right. What button does the gyro again? Jim's like, I think it's that one over there. Click, click, click. Oh, okay, there it goes. Flew it again. Then it was
when
flying.
The green light turns on, it's on.
Yeah, something like that. So we flew that plane around, but once again, it was getting blown around quite a bit, and unfortunately, we kind of cartwheeled that plane, kind of broke the nose off. So it wasn't too terrible of a break, but. It was definitely one that's going to be repairable, but it's just kind of sad because now he brought out 4 planes and we're already down 2. So then we got to the Rascal. It kind of calmed down for a bit, and we got the Rascal up. And as for the whole calculations of figuring out the power weight ratio, we definitely nailed it. I mean, Jim got it right. So the plane seemed to fly, for the weight and balance of for the batteries that he wanted to fly with it, as well as the size of the propeller. The plane had plenty of power. In fact, I was able to fly it around at half power the whole time, but it was having a problem. The plane was definitely having a problem, and it seemed like the not pitch, the angle off the motor, not dehedral. What's the when you're trying to figure out for your motor, you have to have a little left in it.
You have to have a little right,
a little
in
down.
There.
Yeah,
right. Down,
so
right
that seemed to be off because the plane would climb anything above half throttle. The plane would climb horribly, or if you went full power, it just wanted to jump off the ground and everything. So I was like, yeah, Jim, something's up. I trimmed it down as much as I didn't go enough to make it fly level at full power, because once you changed, it would be equally bad. The minute you cut it back to half throttle, it just wanted to nose over. Then it wouldn't fly level. So I kind of trimmed it for flying half throttle, with enough down in it. And then I just told him to be really careful that if he had to use full throttle, just to kind of bump it in there and then not use it, just fly the plane at half throttle. So pretty much we flew that around, but like I said, the wind was flip flopping, and Jim was having a hard time lining the plane up at the runway, and so as I was trying to talk him through it, and we're talking and discussing it, I just started looking at his hands, and I noticed that Jim has the habit with his left hand that I noticed that he wasn't working his rudder at all, very little, if at all. And I was like, hey, Jim, you need to put a little bit more rudder when you come in, to line the runway up. Just, once you kind of get it lined up, left or right type of thing, then you can just use the rudder to kind of get you right in the center. And, he was just doing the aileron thing, and it was just jerking him all over the place, and he just couldn't line up with the wind blowing him. And, unfortunately, he kind of, the last flight, he kind of brought that one in and kind of hit rather hard, and unfortunately he broke off his firewall. But he didn't. He had used, basically what had happened, he had used the like I said, remember he converted this from a regular nitro engine motor,
right?
And he used the same motor mount that you normally have, right? So he had that black glass filled motor mount that was on there, and then he drilled some holes into it, and then with the aluminum X mount and some plywood, he fashioned another firewall that would attach right to the end of the
standoff
for that standoff that he had for the regular nitro motor, and that would give him that that little bit of left or right thrust alignment. Was already built into that thing, so that put it in, but it doesn't do your up and down, right? So basically, his up and down, he had it up a little bit too much, and that's why it was constantly wanting to climb. So anyway, like I said, it was a break to the plane, but for him, it's going to be an easy fix. So I'm going to send him some motor mounts, or look to see what I have. If I have some extra motor mounts, that he can just put in there and adjust and get to the right, the right length and everything. But yeah, other than that, the plane was, like I said, for the weight ratio of the plane, it worked really well. But like I said, he definitely was having a little bit of trouble with doing his using his rudder. So I talked to him and I said, well, how about for some homework? You go home, you crank up the winds on your real flight simulator, and then you just fly all your planes or a similar plane, find a similar size plane and just fly it with the rudder only. Don't even use the ailerons, just fly it with the rudder only and see how you do. So, and then I kind of thought about it and was like, well, that wasn't exactly the right thing to say, because I was like, well, because really if you practice doing coordinated turns.
Well, okay, so I understand what he's talking about when it comes to trying to get Jim to fly with the rudder. And in Jim's defense, I know that the little what were we talking? The jet, right? The jet doesn't have a rudder, and neither does the Zaggy.
Yeah.
So in his defense, if he's flying those two, the two airplanes that don't have the rudder, and then he jumps on one that does have the rudder, getting your head back or wrapped around where that's, what the way it should work. But I also know of several people that will do that. They'll add throttle and then they'll remove their thumb off of the rudder to try and get it to, just use it.
Well, I mean, when I first started learning rudder, I think I didn't start learning to use rudder until I flew 3D planes.
Right.
And to try to do flat turns and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so like most of my planes were rudder elevator planes, but I put them on the ailerons. Because that's what they taught us to do in order to learn how to fly a plane, because it's going to end up being a lot like the ailerons in terms of how it flies without the rudder. Right. And that proves to be reasonably true. But, coming in a crosswind or any kind of wind that isn't straight down the runway, you have to come in at an angle if you're not going to, or you have to tilt the ailerons a little bit before you touch ground, so that you can be in the middle of the runway, and that's just a lousy way to fly the plane in the end. But
if you don't understand it, I think it's I think if you understood how the actual aerodynamics work in a crosswind, it would probably make a lot more sense. But most RC guys aren't pilot. If they're not a pilot already, for me it's very easy, because it's a natural reaction for me in a crosswind to come in. You put the upwind wing into the wind, so you lower that wing to keep the airplane from blowing, over to the other side of the runway. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you use the rudder to straighten the nose out. So you should have a low wing into the wind and the nose going right down the runway. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's after doing it for 30 plus years, it's just a natural reaction. Right. When that happens.
Well, and I think to me too, the other thing was I learned how to crab in as you're coming down the runway. You got to crab in, and then you got to straighten out so that you can land. You're not going to hit the wheel and cartwheel because you came in crabbed, right? But again, I don't think I started really learning the rudder or wanted to even learn. Jay would kept telling me, use your rudder. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I kind of blow them off. Until I started flying 3D planes, where you can't really fly that with just ailerons. It doesn't turn.
Right.
Without the rudder, or it can, but it's a really crappy performer. Yeah, it's really crappy performer. It's all yank and bank, and then that doesn't, that's no fun to fly that way either, from my view, unless you're, avoiding paintballs or something. But so once I just learned how to do that using the rudder on the 3D plane, then using rudder is a natural event,
right?
And it does make flying easier. I think on the Funjet, didn't we put in some mix for that rudder aileron coordination or something? If I remember right.
Did the Funjet even have a rudder? I didn't think the Funjet had a rudder.
Yeah, I think it did.
No, because the motor was in the back.
The Funjet?
Yeah.
No. Maybe I'm not.
Did it have a
Fun Racer? Fun Racer's in the front. Fun Racer, not Fun Jet.
Fun Racer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Sorry.
I apologize.
Got to clear that up. Yeah,
no, that's
Fun
right.
Racer
that's
had
right.
the rudder. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And we did,
And
yes, we did put a little bit of
just enough so that when you're turning, it's not going to do too many crazy things. But you still needed the rudder on occasion to make a sharper turn or to do other things. And again, pointing down the runway. Of course, that didn't have wheels, so any way you landed, it was a good landing, right? As far as I'm concerned, that one was fun.
Well, I think, Jay, and correct me if I'm wrong, he had called me on the way home from the field and was discussing with me, because he felt bad that he didn't explain this as well as he could have. And so he called me. He's like, how should I have explained how to use this rudder, or what should I have done differently? And I told him, I was like, oh, that's a good topic, that we can talk about. And I can think about it over time, from when he called me till now. And, try to come up with a solution on how to help Jim or help others who have a hard time, flying a crosswind landing. And we have them at our field as well. I've seen it. Guys will land across the runway. They'll come like right towards you so they don't have to land downwind. And, of course, the bigger airplane, faster the airplane, if you're flying a turbine, you can't really do it across the runway. You have to, you have to go down the runway like you're supposed to. So a couple different things. I'm going to go back to what Jay said originally about the flaps. And I think a lot of times we rely really heavily on flaps to get ourselves slowed down and land, because in a no-wind situation, you can come in really fast. The flaps do help you slow down, get a little bit slower, and it helps you in a landing configuration. I will tell you, in large transport category airplanes, if it is very gusty and windy out there, we reduce the flap setting. We don't land with full flaps. So in the RC world, I suggest you do the same thing, right? So when in the turbine world, when we come in and it's really gusty, full flaps act as parachutes underneath there. It'll move your airplane around quite a bit. But if you get them out and you go to maybe a half flap setting, then you can keep your speed up, and that speed gives your rudder more authority. And it lowers the nose, just, it kind of keeps that nose up. And so you're able to penetrate the wind a little bit. You don't have to have near as much throttle, because if you have a really, really heavy headwind or even a crosswind, you need to keep the throttle in so that your ground speed, or your speed across the, the threshold of the runway, is going to be the same. Because if you pull the power to idle, the airplane's going to slow down on its trajectory across the ground, and it's just going to start sinking. And if you're not inches above the ground, it's going to have catastrophic effects, because you're not going to be able to save it when it gets too slow. So reduce the flaps in a really gusty or a changing wind condition like what you were talking about, Jay, or no flaps. You can do a no flap landing in an RC airplane. It's no big deal. Yeah. You're going to come in a little bit quicker, a little bit more throttle control. You don't want to jam the throttle, but you want to set it at, maybe a quarter, an eighth of a throttle, just to see if it's coming into the wind. You want to keep that all the way till you're just above the ground, and then reduce it, and not just chop it, but reduce it slowly so that the wheels touch down. And, a lot of guys, even in the big airplanes, some of the best landings you'll ever make is with a really, really big gusty crosswind, because A, you're having to work for it. But two, you've got a wind that will keep you, floating the way you should be if you have the power in there, and it'll just allow you to come down and touch really super soft. No wind landings are a little more difficult, because you're moving forward at a much faster clip. So you have a tendency to bounce a little bit more. Secondly, I was thinking about what Jay said about, how he explained it. And I think if I had a student that was looking at learning crosswinds, rather than just have him go up and just fly with the rudder, that gets him used to using the rudder, but it doesn't really, it gets him used to turning with the rudder. So I think that it will help you, okay, well, my thumb over here, I understand that it turns, but I don't think it'll help as much with the crosswinds. And so what I would suggest, or what I would do, and if Jim's listening, he can try this on his, simulator, and then he can, kind of shoot us a note and let us know how it goes. But I would actually take off and fly a pattern, a box pattern. And then, as Mike was talking about, crab into the wind as you're coming down to the runway. Then don't land. Keep the airplane just a little, probably 10 feet, 20 feet in the air, enough to where if something happened, you could recover and get out of there. But now because you have maybe half flaps and you've got enough power to keep yourself going, then you're crabbing. What I would do is lower the wing and straighten the airplane out. And then I would hold those controls all the way down the runway. Then when I got to the end of the runway, the other end of the runway, the takeoff, departure end of the runway, I would let it, add throttle and then go around and let it crab back into the wind. So what you're doing is you're training yourself to maintain a stick input for the entire length of the runway and then get out of it. And then if you did that, every single time coming around, it becomes this natural reaction when you come down and you see your airplane is crabbing and you push the rudder to move the nose to where it's facing right down the runway, then the airplane's going to start moving away from you and you're going to have to dip the wing to get it to come back to you. So in my eyes, from an instructor standpoint, I think, both in the real airplane and RC world, that's a better way, to kind of get used to traveling down the runway. And then once you kind of get used to that, then come around and, see how much, how low you can go. I just come around lower every time. And then eventually you're just going to touch down. And then obviously when you touch down, you can't just release the sticks. A lot of people do that and the airplane just skids off the side of the runway. So you have to kind of keep the rudder or steering, and then you need to keep that aileron into the wind, or the wing will lift up if the wind's gusty enough.
Right. If
that makes sense.
It does.
Hey, so another quick question. So one of the things that something that Jim did mention to me, he said that one of the problems that he sometimes has with the simulator is that that his plane or objects in the sim tend to get really small on him. And he's like, so he kind of loses it, depending on what screen he's using at home, whether it's the TV or his computer screen or whatever.
Sure.
So I was wondering, maybe instead of doing the view where you're standing outside the plane, actually, like watching your RC model, doing the inside the plane view, would that
I don't think that would help.
You don't think that would help?
I don't think that would help.
Yeah, I agree
You
with
need the
Mike.
practice of your eye, and the fact that it's getting far away probably means that he's not. Well, one, you can change that so that you are always some distance away from the plane. There's a feature that allows that. And instead of just, I found because the screens are so small, you can't really stand at the box and fly like that because the screen's too small. If you have a big 75-inch screen, then you could probably do that, and that would probably work. But the distance from a plane thing is, in my opinion, the right way to do that.
Oh, okay. I forgot all about that.
There's a setting.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is if you're getting away from yourself on a smaller screen, you're going too fast.
Yeah.
Find a slower airplane.
Yeah.
And, or a bigger airplane, because a bigger airplane is going to appear closer to you, right? And I know I have Real Flight, and I know on Real Flight I have 50%. I have a couple airplanes that are at 50%. Those airplanes are huge. And, they're probably full-on aerobatic and edge, and I think I have a yak that's 55, and I think I have a couple turbines that are 50. But those airplanes, if you could find one, fly it closer, right? You want to slow it down, and then when you take off, you're just going to make an immediate turn. So you're going to try and keep it at the edge of the runway. If you're letting the airplane go way out in the screen, you're flying way too far. Bring it all back and try to stay at the edge of the runway, because if you're at the edge of the runway, you're close enough to see the airplane, regardless of what size it is. But I understand what he's talking about, because I had the same problem when I started flying them, right? I mean, I'm on a small screen, computer screen. I have a bigger screen now, but when I first started, and I'm on this little bitty, and that thing would get out there, and I'd be like, I don't know, and then it'd go crash, and I go, okay, well, I just have to hit the button and start over. But if you do it on the simulator, you're going to do it in real life. You're going to let that thing get out there, and you just have to continue to turn it back towards you. Bring it in. Next time, don't let it go crosswind so far. As soon as you turn crosswind, and remember, if it's a crosswind, that wind's blowing you out there. So you're going to have to crab towards yourself anyway to get it to fly a straight line. So it may look kind of weird when you turn the airplane on a straight line downwind, like if you were looking at a ruler, that ruler's going to have to tilt towards you in order to make a straight line across the ground. That's what a crab does. A crab allows you to go into the wind But if you looked at the ground track, it's a straight line. So,
yep. I think one of the, and I really have a minute or so left, but one of the things for me was the challenge is the idea of not putting more throttle when I'm using the rudder. So again, for me, the best place for me to have learned rudder was from the 3D airplanes, because I'm actually trying to keep the nose up and flying it level, and so you got to use rudder to kind of keep it in place so it doesn't jack itself around, and then use ailerons to make it rotate. And so for me, that's where I got the best understanding, because if you start playing with the throttle and you've got the nose up, it's going to come down. So you really have to get a good feel for where you are with the throttle as well as the, rudder. So.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break, and we will continue this discussion in our next episode. That way you can kind of continue with us. If you have a suggestion, please email us at parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com, or jump on our Facebook listeners group and post something there and let us know what you think. But for now, I'm Michael from Arizona.
I'm Jay from the hills of Texas.
And I'm AK Mike in Texas.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Let's fly.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.